I drink to your health when I'm with you. I drink to your health when I'm alone. I drink to your health so often, I'm starting to worry about my own. Ladies and gentlemen, Colleeny of Spookily, loyal, trusted, patient listeners, welcome to Healing from Irishness. And in this episode, we're talking about alcohol. Hello, and welcome back to Healing from Irishness. In this episode, I want to tell a personal tale and a kind of a family tale. I come from a family where there's been a lot of alcoholics. My dad and my uncle were alcoholics. I have cousins who are alcoholics, great-great-grandfathers who were alcoholics. And this river of alcoholism ended with me. As a teenager growing up, I was very convinced. I had this sense like I am nailed on to become an alcoholic. And I was always fascinated. I was always drawn to places. Was always drawn to playing with the fire of alcoholism. You know what I mean? My first job, I was 14 years of age, was collecting ashtrays in the lodge pub. And I go there with my little white shirt and my slacks on a Friday and Saturday evening with a dirty dish towel tucked into my back pocket, going around collecting ashtrays and the drinks of glasses. And you'd have a drink there after work too sometimes, you know, if one of the younger bartenders felt open to it, they'd pour you like a glass of Budweiser or something. And so I was always surrounded by alcohol. One of the jobs that I did for longest in my life has been working in bars. I worked in bars all over the world. Yet the river of alcoholism, this genetic tendency in my line to drink, it ended with me. And when I look at how it ended with me and why it ended with me, I'm just filled with so much gratitude. I feel so lucky that I didn't become an alcoholic. And I attribute so much of that luck and that fortune to the love that my mother put in me. When I think about the alcoholics who I've worked with and the alcoholics in my family, what brought them to alcohol was a desire to transcend. But the thing they were trying to transcend was the pain of existence. And although I did have so much pain in my existence, I still had this buffer of my mother's love, and that protected me. And it enabled me to kind of feel when my body was in pain and stop. You know, because when I was younger, I would drink a huge amount, and I worked in clubs, and I kind of managed to drink so much because in most of the places that I drank, I was able to drink for free. And because I worked as when you're a bartender, you drink for free wherever, because you can also give out free drinks, and then you know that you get those free drinks back. When I lived in Dublin, I could wander around all the pubs and get free drinks. And so having very little money never stopped me from getting drunk. And all the people who I was surrounded with were all heavy drinkers too. And we were all heavy drinkers, and we went to early houses, and we went back to parties and sessions, and it never stopped. Yet there was always something in me that would pull me back. And some of the people who I spent time with in my early 20s um, are no longer with us. They died. They died of alcoholism. But I feel that I was somehow saved from that. And I was saved from it by whatever love that was in me that would make me sensitive enough to go, I feel so sick now, I'm going home. And these people could override the sickness in their body and just continue. I remember that with my dad too, waking up and going into my dad and I, we had a bit of a ritual where I would bring him a cup of tea in the morning and we would sometimes play cards. We'd play a game called Jack Change It, and my dad would always beat me. My dad was very competitive with me, and for some reason, I, even though I would lose every game that we played, and in later years I found out that he was cheating a lot of the time, I still just wanted to be close to him. I loved him. I wanted to feel his interest in me. And I remember going into him in the mornings, and he would be hungover and smoking a Benson and Hedges at the side of the bed, and coughing his lungs out and drinking tea and saying, "Oh, you didn't put enough sugar in that. Go get me more sugar." And I get him more sugar. And the whole room just stinking of Guinness and Pernod. And that been all so familiar to me as a child. And the familiarity continued on into later life. I remember having partners who, who had drink problems for some reason, for the reason of familiarity and the way that we move through life trying to remake our childhoods. I was always drawn to alcoholics, was always drawn to people who would wake up the morning after and stink of booze. And and I knew exactly what to do. I'll go get water, I'll go get eggs, I'll go make coffee. I was so good at that. Like I imagine other men, for example, are just so excited to parallel park, so excited to put up a shelf in the bedroom, so excited to step in front of a hostile person, so excited to be this role in a relationship. But for me, the role that I was so excited to play was the carer of the alcoholic. I am your knight, the hangover knight in shining armor. And so this was always my association with alcohol. And when I think about alcoholism and us, when I think about alcoholism and us and Irish people, our alcoholism is our form of spirituality. It really is. Like all spirituality is it's an attempt to worship something. We want to worship. We want to devote ourselves to something. This is a very, very human need to connect to something divine, right? And the divinity that we want to connect to is very pure. Yet religion turned us against this divinity. Religion, its structures, its shame, its guilt, its control, its totalitarianism, its abuse, turned so many of us against the transcendent path of spirituality and worship, and for Irish people in particular. And so many of us get pulled into the secondary path of transcendence, which is alcoholism. It's addiction. It's an addiction to feeling something else. All of us have this calling inside of us, this spiritual calling, this deep spiritual calling to feel something else. It's not just a coincidence that we have this deep sense of otherness inside of us. It's not just a coincidence that we wonder about our sense of belonging, that we feel isolated and lonely. And all of these things, this loneliness, this dissatisfaction with life, in Buddhism, they call it dukkha. It's just that and dukkha really means that you can do whatever you want. You can marry well, you can have happy children, you can build a house, but you will never fully feel satisfied with the material reality. Things will always break down, things will change. The frustration doesn't go away. And in Buddhism, they call this samsara. The samsara is a wheel, and we're caught in the wheel. Little hamsters caught in this wheel, trying to find satisfaction in a realm where there is no satisfaction. The answer to samsara is spirituality. For Irish people, the answer to samsara is drink. And this is the problem. And this is where we're stuck. The first book that I wrote on this topic, I wrote a book called This Is It. And my dream with that book was to normalize spirituality for Irish people who were abused by spirituality, who were abused by religion, who turned their back on everything, who couldn't conceive of God energy, who couldn't conceive of love, who couldn't imagine, there's some transcendental methods for making myself happier. People who were, it's very interesting in when you meet someone who has been just battered by dating. Dating can be so hard, especially the way that apps are established these days so that we don't actually find love. But when you meet someone who's just been battered by the repetitive cycles of dating, falling in love, falling out of love, being ghosted, being treated badly, and they eventually say, I will turn my back on love. I don't want it anymore. And there's something tragic about that. And in a similar way, so many of us Irish people had decided to turn our backs on spirituality because of the negative effect of religion in our lives and in the lives of our ancestors. And so instead, we moved to alcohol. Because the thing is, you cannot physically exist here. You cannot get by as a human without something. Because life is just so difficult. And life is so difficult when our only way of navigating life is through this material realm. When I say material, it's the things we touch, the things we feel, the things we know. The spiritual realm is when we kind of surrender to the space of, I don't know, but I believe. I can't see it, but I know that it's true. I can't prove my origins, but I feel that I'm connected to something divine and bigger than me. When I think of my dad was very closed off to spirituality. And he was closed off to spirituality because he grew up in the Bible Belt in Northern Ireland and the North. And, his weekends were just Sunday schools, Saturday, Sunday, the choir practice midweek. And he just got battered with so much religion, with so much of the controlling effects of religion, that when he left and when he escaped from all these various Presbyterian, Methodists, weird loyalist sects and cults that he'd been involved in as a teenager, he just went into self-destruction. Because my dad had been brainwashed to believe that without God, he was shameful. Without God, without the God of these institutions, that he was nothing. He had no value. And my poor dad just became an alcoholic. Yet, I remember, and my father also loved the mountains. He loved nature. And he taught me to love these things. And this was really a kind of a deeper seeking inside of him. To this day, I've met very few people who were as emotionally charged as my dad. You bring him into the mountains, you bring him to Lubnaquilla or the Mourns, and we go down to the Reeks or the Sleet Blooms, or even out near Balmunnet, I'd doing the ring there. And some bleak day where the clouds would briefly part and a peak would emerge. And my father's eyes would just fill with water as if he was looking on the face of God itself. And I believe for him, he was looking on the face of God. That's what this was for him. And this is the interesting thing about alcoholics too. And it's why I think we need to be more loving towards the alcoholics, is that the alcoholics are so sensitive and they're full with this beauty, with this perception of beauty, with this capacity for beauty, and it overwhelms them. I remember I worked for a time with recovering alcoholics. I worked for a time with like recovering heroin addicts and guys who just got out of prison and things like this. And all their eyes reminded me of my dad's. They all had these blue alpine eyes that just looked like they were like primed to spill with water. And this is the thing. This is the thing about so many Irish people, is that we are sensitive by design. We're naturally sensitive. We are born with this innate sensitivity, this innate spirituality. And we're born into a society where it doesn't feel safe to be sensitive. We're born into a society where it doesn't feel that we can really allow our sensitivity to show, but that sensitivity has to emerge somewhere. And so often it does in bars and with alcohol. I remember for so many years working in bars, and there would always be this moment late at night where someone wanted to stay on, help me mopping the floor or sweeping up. And what they really wanted to do was just share something with me. They'd want to open up as I was stacking chairs on top of tables and pulling down shutters and getting the last of the people out of the bathrooms or whatever, cleaning up mess and things like this. There'd always be someone who'd be like, "Oh, here, can I help you?" The person had helped me, and then they just want to talk to me. There'd be a level of sensitivity that they reached and they just couldn't find. They couldn't find a space to be seen or heard, because this is the thing. We all just want to be seen. We all just want to be seen and we want to be heard. And we often drink because that can help us to get there. I know that, like, especially amongst men, a lot of us, and I know I did this myself, like in my 30s, I would drink in order to really, really connect. Because at a certain point of drinking, you get to talk about things. You get to communicate like, hey, this is what I think of life and this is what's going on for me. And it felt somehow safe. And the reason it felt safe was because you knew that you could brush it off by saying, oh, I was just fucking drunk. And you knew that the person wouldn't really remember what you'd said the day after. But I remember so much of my youth trying to process the heavy thoughts and feelings inside my body at 5 o'clock in the morning, sat at a bus stop in the cold, or maybe at an after hours, or in an early house, trying to talk to someone, to be seen and to be heard. But often it worked. Often you would. Some would say, ah, sure, I feel the same way too, pal, or this is life, or what can you do? But at the same time, it was destroying my body. It was killing me a little bit. When I stopped drinking, I did it mostly because I had discovered the Vipassana meditation. And with the Vipassana meditation, you're learning to navigate the world through the senses in your body. So your body is a little bit like a radar system. And this radar system enables you to just know things. You connect to a different type of reality, a subtle reality, rather than the solid nuts and bolts reality that we encounter every day. The Vipassana meditation teaches you to become aware of vibrations and frequencies. Alcohol numbs us to feeling. Vipassana awakens your feeling. So I couldn't do both at the same time. And I remember when I stopped drinking, it was probably one of the loneliest periods in my life. because my whole identity had been built on drinking. I was a good drinker, a solid drinker. Oh, go for a drink with Connor. Connor's a good drinker. I was very proud of the fact that I could put away a lot of drink, and I had this stamina in terms of like how I looked on my masculine identity. I felt macho by how much I could drink, by how I could still walk home. Okay. I could still navigate the world. I wasn't sloppy. And so when I stopped drinking, a lot of people turned their back on me, and I turned my back on a lot of them because I went out to pubs still here and there. But I remember just being so bored. Remember just feeling like, God, this makes me even lonelier. I'm trying to talk to people here and no one will listen to me. There was, of course, the judgment too, like no one really enjoys when you're drinking, no one really enjoys the company of a non-drinker. It can make the drinkers feel uncomfortable, like they've all agreed to do something, but this one person has decided to not do it. It creates a sort of a level of mistrust. And so I remember just walking away and becoming very lonely. And it really mirrored with my dad's life after my dad stopped drinking. My dad stopped drinking when I was about 18 or 19. And slowly his friendships just drifted away. Then he stayed more at home. And then his body started to really take on all the effects of drinking. His body started to just weaken, his knees. He had a big old gut, and his knees suffered a lot of damage from carrying that gut around. My dad couldn't get up into mountains anymore, or sometimes the closest he could get would be driving up some military road in the Wicklow Gap and looking from the passenger seat. But he never really scaled anything anymore. And that was sad for him, because that was a rare moment of transcendence for him. He got to experience worship, the same worship that you experienced, that he had experienced as an alcoholic. And, in his last years, I remember talking to my dad more and more about spirituality, and he danced around the edges of it. I'd go home and he'd be reading me some book by the Dalai Lama, or he'd have some sort of Buddhist text lying around. But he read it purely from a theoretical point of view. He read it with his mind. He never felt it with his heart. He never connected. It never touched and moved him in a way that I feel lucky enough that it moved me. When I think of Irish people, and I think of how we're received around the world, and I know when I was 17, I first went off traveling, and wherever I went, and I met Irish people, not Irish people, but people who knew Irish people. And they always associated me with alcohol. You'd be in a hostel somewhere in Switzerland or Australia or wherever, and you meet someone and say, oh, there's an Irish guy here. He'll drink with us. And I assumed that identity, and I did it very well. I performed the drunk Irishman abroad very well. And I became very proud of that. It was something that followed me for so long. And I think this happens to so many of us, that we end up establishing an identity around alcohol. It's alcohol that enables us to briefly transcend our anxiety and all the social worries that we have. It allows us to become messy, to become rascals, to become cheeky. And for someone like me who could never express what they wanted or needed, alcohol suddenly allowed me to be confident, to transcend all of the limits in my personality. I could talk to women. I could even dance. So many things that alcohol allowed me to do, but I could never do without it. And when I stopped drinking, I remember thinking, God, am I ever going to dance again? Am I ever going to talk to a stranger again? Am I ever going to talk to a girl again? Could I ever even have sex again? And these were the worries that carried me in that period. And it's interesting because the less I drank alcohol and the more I kind of moved into personal development, the more I began to connect to a type of freedom, a freedom that wasn't dependent upon anything else. When I think about my dad and his rush to go to the pub after work every day, he'd be out there, 6, 7 nights a week. And what he was looking for was freedom, transcendence. He was like a little monk going into his cave and just deeply searching for some escape, some way to end the cycle of misery. Yet, the way that my dad went about it was we all know that he would never reach that space because alcohol can't bring you there. Alcohol just destroys your body and temporarily lifts you out of her. But as I went on my own path, and I kind of feel that I carried the baton from my dad, as we all do, we're all just continuing the same energetic direction and motivation of the people who've gone before us. When you look at your life, all you're doing is carrying on the dreams, the hopes of your family. You're also carrying the trauma and the limits, but you have to look on this that you are the tip of a huge wave that's breaking and has been breaking for thousands of years, and you get to decide what energies go where. And I feel very lucky that so much of the freedom that I found came through developing a deeper relationship with myself, through transcending the material world, not through alcohol, but through just facing who I am, really spending time understanding who I am through meditation, through workshops, through deep exploration, to being alone, to facing your fears. So often, our connection to alcohol is related to fear. We don't want to face a fear. It's as simple as this. You go into a social situation, I'm afraid, and you drink alcohol, and in that very moment, you've taken a shortcut. The way of the warrior is to go into that social situation, to feel the fear and go, no, I will not abandon myself. I will stay with myself, and I will walk through this process. I will come to a place of peace inside of me. I will connect to the divine energy in me, and I will allow this to express. This will be my form of worship. It won't be a worship of alcohol. It'll be a form of worship of myself, of the journey that I'm on. There's an old joke, and it goes, why did God give Irish people whiskey? And the answer is because if he didn't, they would have taken over the world. And I think that says a hell of a lot about us, in terms of just what is there beneath this relationship with alcohol. I feel for so many of us, alcohol was an unwanted kind of initiation, an unwanted inheritance. It was given to us. It was passed down to us as, this is what you do. This is how you celebrate. This is how you escape. In other cultures, in other societies, in other indigenous beliefs, they have techniques and tools for transcending life. They're told, this is how you become a man. This is how you become a woman. This is how you understand reality. And we, or many of us, we had alcohol. There's no cure for life, but alcohol makes it better. And what this does, in actual fact, is it just robs us of this innate spiritual connection that we have. Like I always say here, Irish people are wired for quantum connections. We are so deeply rooted into spirituality. We have this. It's our birthright. It's in us. And alcohol feels like some crazy psyop to just divert all this power and energy that we have into something that is ultimately so destructive towards us. So it's really important, I feel, that we learn to engage with this spiritual side of us and see that, like, so much of our association with alcohol is a desire to transcend. And the only way that we actually get to transcend is by connecting to the deepest love inside of ourselves, by connecting to the part of yourself that needs most care and attention. You can't do this with alcohol. You can only do it by being so aware and present, by being in those spaces, those places where anxiety rises, where stress is overwhelming, and you just connect to a little part of yourself and go, I love you. I love the divinity that's trying to shine through me, and I will express that. And I think that's what we're missing out on. And this is what alcohol has been masking. All that being said, I mean, I do have a drink every so often now, but my relationship with the alcohol, from this place where it was something that I needed in order to feel free, no longer exists. I can feel free without it. I can feel free because I've done the work to kind of recognize the divinity in me and to know that all the shame and the guilt wasn't actually a part of me. It never was. And once I penetrated through that, I didn't really need alcohol anymore. And I don't need it now. So thanks for listening. As usual, I do one-on-one sessions with people. It's where I get most of my information from. I speak to a lot of alcoholics, former alcoholics, and all of them have this deep creative desire inside of them, a real need to worship. And when I say worship, I mean to just do something bigger than yourself. That's what worship is. It's devotion to something bigger than yourself. It can be art, it can be music, it can be love. I work with people. If you're curious to work with me, you can book a session. If you're curious to give it as a gift, that also works. I have a Patreon. We go into deeper spiritual work there. You can join on free 1-week trial. That's fun. What else? I have a course called Healing from Irishness. Yeah. This podcast is part of that process for me. Thank you for listening. Cheers. Slán. Love you. Slán. See you soon. Bye-bye.